And welcome to Catholics Coast to Coast. I'm Ace McKay, where as we celebrate our independence this weekend, we're also celebrating our dependence on God. So as we deepen that, just want to let you know, Podcast Central, a great place this summer for you to check out some of these Catholic conversations when you go to EWTN.com/podcast. And then while you find your favorites, subscribe wherever you like to stream. That way you take them with you wherever you go. As we dive in this week, let's see what's happening with our Mass readings as we check in with your word on the Word.
Hi, I'm Veronica.
And I'm Melissa. We're going to start off this week with a pop quiz. Which saint is credited with saying this quote? He who sings praise twice. You have until they open to figure it out.
We're really doing this?
Yeah.
Is it St. Augustine?
You're correct. All right, I'm going to take these off now and we can start.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at the responsorial psalm for this Sunday.
It comes from chapter 66. The response is, "Let all the earth cry out to God with joy."
The first 3 verses talk about praising and worshiping God. Then, the last verse changes to a first-person perspective, and the writer is talking about God's kindness.
It praises God's tremendous deeds and refers to the parting of the Red Sea. I remember when my sister was little, she used to watch The Prince of Egypt a lot. She was fascinated by the different plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. The same God that led his people out of Egypt with his mighty power is the same God that looks after me and you today and forever.
So this week, we challenge you to read or sing your favorite hymn. Maybe it's one from childhood that's always stuck with you, or go look up a new hymn and see if you can find a new favorite. Wait, Melissa, I don't think I know this. What's your favorite hymn?
Mine's Amazing Grace.
Ah, how sweet the sound is Amazing Grace. I think it saved a wretch like me. That's why mine is Be Not Afraid. I always found a lot of comfort in it in hard times.
That's a good one. And tell us your favorite hymn in the comments section.
And catch us next week here on The Word on the Word.
Bye.
Toodles.
Continuing our jubilant year as the Word on the Word gives us more insights and reflections. You can check it out at Podcast Central, EWTN.com/podcast. As we continue this week's Catholics Coast to Coast, I am Ace McKay, checking in with Inspired by Faith as Rosemary MacKenzie joins the conversation to talk about freedom in hormone monitoring for women. So if you've been trying to have a baby or been praying for God to open that door, this is a great conversation as we check in with the experts and get inspired by faith with this week's Catholics Coast to Coast.
Welcome to Inspired by Faith, the program of the Columbus Catholic Women's Conference. I'm Michelle Fanley, and I'm joined each program in the studio with my friend Emily Jaminette. This is a show to help you be inspired by our Catholic faith, live out the gospel message, and deepen your relationship with Jesus Christ. We hope this show provides an uplifting 30 minutes to help refresh your soul and strengthen your faith. As was born out of our friendship, we hope it encourages you to deepen and develop spiritual friendships with your sisters in Christ. Well, hello, Emily.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited about the variety of topics that we cover as it relates to this podcast. It's pretty amazing over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And we're hitting on something that is near and dear to our hearts and all Catholic women.
I can't wait.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about natural family planning and learning about your hormones and learning about your body, which as a nurse, I'm super fascinated with. And we are really excited and blessed to be joined today by Rose MacKenzie, who is a bachelor's prepared registered nurse with nearly a decade of experience with NFP as an instructor, trained in the Marquette method and symptothermal method. She's worked extensively with women using hormone monitoring across a variety of clinical scenarios. Rose is now the clinical manager at Mira, and she supports healthcare professionals in successfully integrating hormone monitoring into their clinical practice. So Rose has worked previously as a clinical coordinator and a charge nurse in the emergency department. She's also previously worked at a women's health and fertility care specializing in restorative reproductive medicine, including NAPRO and FEMM-based approaches. So welcome, Rose.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here.
That is quite a mouthful, all those. I realize that I'm saying this out loud. I was like, oh, that's some tough words here to put together in a sentence. But what a blessing to have that background, because I know most women, they go into their OB's office and for their annual, and they're like, oh, natural family planning, right? The doctor is like, are you still counting the days? Right there, they are not aware of what is out there for women these days in the natural family planning realm. And you have some amazing tools in your tool belt that we are so excited for you to be able to share with our listeners today.
Yes, of course. I think the first thing to challenge first is the CDC's website that had NFP listed incorrectly for so long. So we have to first kind of fight where we were misrepresented for so long. So that's, where we should start with. NFP is effective, but many people don't know it.
Well, Rose, the first thing we always ask our guests is to tell us a little bit about their faith journey. So could you mind sharing just a little bit about that?
Of course, yes. So I was raised in a devout Catholic family home. I'm the youngest of 9. And, whenever you get asked, what's a fun fact about you, that's always something I get to share. Being the youngest of 9, I got to watch my older siblings grow up and live their lives with, their families. And I like to say I got to witness authentic Catholic marriages and Catholic families in front of my eyes. And so it was a wonderful faith experience from that. I grew up on a family-owned dairy farm, and so the element of faith and nature were intertwined into everything. We had to, of course, we couldn't assume that we would get rain or that our crops would grow, and everything was based on, again, nature and faith. And so that's been a part of my life ever since, I was born. So my faith journey has been an ever-evolving process since I was born, which I think is what everyone's is supposed to be.
That's great. And one of the things that I'm excited about this conversation, Rose, is that a lot of times we talk about natural family planning in a very hush kind of way. Michelle and I have been talking about this, oh my gosh, for years and years and years.
More
decades,
than 25 years.
More than 25 years we've been having this conversation. But a lot of times it's done not in an open forum or, one in which you can look at what is being, literally thrown at us in the culture. So, first and foremost, just explain to women, maybe that have never even considered a natural way of understanding your body, where to begin in those different seasons of life.
Well, I would first just like to, call to mind that our bodies are already doing this. By this, I mean having fluctuating hormones, ovulating, and then having periods. It's really just most of the time we ignore it or, we just put up with a period, but we don't really pay attention to what the body's saying. But when we start, I like to say the hormones are like a harmonious song. So when we start listening to the song, then we can really tell what's happening on the hormonal level, which then allows us women to have great understanding of our bodies, but also have the ability to live more authentically within our own body instead of fighting ourselves. We can live more authentically within ourselves.
And Rose, I mentioned a lot of different types of natural family planning in your bio and some words. So can we just back up a little bit and talk about, so what is exactly, so first of all, the Marquette method.
Well, we might want to back up a little further and just clarify what NFP is.
That's
really
right.
quickly for people. Because
yes.
Really, all NFP is the ability to track your natural biomarkers. And you have lots of biomarkers, so in any method of NFP, you're choosing which biomarkers you want to track. And there are methods that track your hormones directly or indirectly. And so we throw out all these fancy words, Marquette, simple thermal, creatine, Billings, but really they're all the same in that they're teaching a woman and a couple to understand their biomarkers. And with those biomarkers, you know what days you're fertile and what days you're infertile. And you as a couple make a conscious decision of what is our goal right now. Is our goal to try to conceive or try to avoid? And you act accordingly to that decision that you've made together.
And then let's talk about this term restorative health, because I've heard that kind of a more recent term is reproductive restorative health. So what is that and how does that help women compared to what's offered in most mainstream offices?
Yes, so restorative reproductive medicine is really any provider who chooses to solve the problem instead of just covering with the symptoms, just treating the symptoms or using a Band-Aid to make maybe the woman feel better temporarily, but it's not actually fixing the problem. So this can be addressed with, so if you think about restorative reproductive medicine applied to PCOS or applied to recurrent miscarriages or infertility. It's finding the root cause of why those things are happening. Why does the woman have PCOS? Why does the woman continue to have miscarriages? And then addressing the problem as a solution. So it's a long-term goal. So these women are getting not only the goal of what they want, right, maybe a healthy pregnancy or better cycles, but it's also long-term health. So that's what, on the very core, what restorative reproductive health medicine is.
Now, Rose, are you seeing a benefit from women who, practice this restorative or natural, monitoring over the course of their life? Is this just for childbearing years or just to align with the church's teaching, during marriage? Or are you seeing the benefit of, perimenopause, menopause, and ongoing?
Oh, yeah. The ability to support your body the best you can is your whole lifetime. And NFP and restorative reproductive health medicine, both of those are just lifestyles that make it so you are approaching your health as something to be valued and treasured and taken care of. And so that helps you whether you are just having your first period or you just had your last period and now you're moving into the menopausal state. The ability to know what your hormones had been doing and treating them well will set you up for success even when you're postmenopausal.
So we're really excited that you are involved with a new technology, a fabulous new monitor called Mira that gives you very specific and detailed hormone data. This is unequal to what anything we have used in the past and or seen in the past. So can you tell us a little bit about this new exciting technology and how it can help women?
Yes. So Mira is a at-home hormone monitor that gives the women ability to collect a first morning urine sample, dip the wand, and read out actual number values, quantitative measurements of estrogen, progesterone, LH, and FSH. And as you can imagine, that detailed amount of information has not really been available before. Even if you went and got, your blood tested, even if you got your blood tested quite often throughout a cycle, before you never could see this amount of data real time in your bathroom, in the convenience of your own home, and have it be graphed out to you in a free phone app.
It is really amazing. I am looking at my app right now, and just the amount of data that I'm able to collect and able to see, and the amount of also just extra information that you provide for women to learn about their bodies and what's going on and what your hormones should look like. So it's really an incredible piece of equipment. And I guess I would say if someone is out there listening, well, who could benefit this? Where could you start with this using this this Mira monitor?
My running joke is anyone who has ovaries that are functioning, so from puberty to menopause, the device is helpful. Now, there's some situations where it's more helpful than others. So some examples are those women who have a known hormonal abnormality, so they have PCOS or they have a complication with endometriosis, they have irregular cycles. Of course, it's very helpful in those situations. Very helpful for those who are in their perimenopausal transition. So as you can imagine, in perimenopause, the hormones don't always do what they're supposed to when they're supposed to. And so being able to see that in real time happening can be very validating for the woman to understand what her body is doing so that she can, again, support it the best she can. Also helpful for anyone trying to avoid or achieve a pregnancy. I have to give out a very quick caveat here. The device was not designed to try to avoid a pregnancy. So in and of itself, it is not a contraceptive. It is not a method to avoid a pregnancy. But if you learn from a certified NFP instructor, then the Mira device can be the tool that helps you to track those hormones. And the method will then be the quote-unquote rules that you apply to the device. So a lot of different situations, but ultimately anyone who wants to know what their hormones are doing can go ahead and get it, test at home, and use it for their own care or when they go and meet with a provider, they can come with data more, ready for that conversation to advocate for themselves. And really, we're just seeing how helpful it is for women to actually know what their bodies are doing.
Well, as a perimenopause lady here, I would love to talk a little bit about the symptoms and ways to help women. A lot of times, in our culture, we're so focused on the beginning and those early years of childbearing. But right now, how can we, use, monitoring and, what are the additional supports that women should be thinking about in the fast-paced world of towards the end of fertility?
Yeah, well, I would say first, sometimes we just assume that our fertility is going to kind of just sputter out, and that's not really how it goes. So the first thing I would recommend is to get educated, because unfortunately, it's not really set up. Our society is not set up to teach women about perimenopause at any certain stage. You think about other things like teenagers, or I should say middle schoolers, at least have some sort of sex ed. And we think about women who have just had a baby, they at least get some education on childbirth and breastfeeding. But there's not really a stage or an event or a time frame when we as a society teach someone about perimenopause. And so a lot of women just kind of enter into perimenopause, and there's not great information for them. They're kind of sometimes unaware that they've entered perimenopause. They start having symptoms. They don't know what they are. They go on, just dealing with them for a couple of years, and then turns out, it was the beginning of the process of perimenopause. So the first thing I'd recommend anyone in that situation is to first get educated. And there's lots of ways to get educated. If you have a fertility awareness educator, they can help you to understand what kind of can be coming. We always say as NFP instructors, we never want you to just follow the same thing you've been doing for the last, maybe it's been working great for you for 10, 15, 20 years, and you just assume, I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. I'll go through perimenopause just fine. That is the time when you really need to touch base back with an instructor, get yourself prepared and educated. And then there's also courses that you can take. Thankfully, the internet has made it easier for women to understand perimenopause themselves, but get a good provider who is going to help you through this transition.
Well, one of the things I was impressed about the app was also seeing the trends of other women, in a similar age group. And that really helped me realize, gosh, my hormones are very low, that progesterone,
Yeah.
And so what do you do when all of a sudden you realize like maybe there is something out of whack? I imagine this is a tool that you could also bring to your OB, or what do you recommend when it comes to that?
Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, OBs are, the jack of all trades, master of none. They are wonderful. We love our OBs, but many of them are not specialized or really passionate about perimenopause. And so, and any time that you're not super passionate about something, you don't continue to gain more skills. Like you're not going to conferences and learning the new research about perimenopause, because that's, they're focused on many other things. And so sometimes you have to find a provider who specializes in perimenopause. So it might be an OB that specializes in perimenopause, or it might be, there are some primary care physicians, there's NPs. To be honest, I'm seeing a lot of the perimenopause specialists outside of conventional medicine, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because most of the providers say I wasn't given enough time to spend with my patients in conventional medicine, and so I couldn't give them the care they needed in perimenopause, so they move outside of conventional medicine. So It may be a little bit harder to find, but the providers do exist.
And you're listed on My Catholic Doctors, correct?
Yes.
Are there providers in there women can find to help them through this transition?
Yes, there are providers at My Catholic Doctor. It's very simple, mycatholicdoctor.com. There's a women's health section. The providers that are listed at My Catholic Doctor are almost always in that category of the restorative reproductive health medicine. So they are wanting to kind of restore the woman to the optimal health. And in perimenopause, we know that that doesn't mean that we're going to try and get you ovulating normally. Hormones are all balanced. But we are going to help you transition through in a way that respects what your body's doing, supports it when we can, versus, unfortunately in conventional medicine, we often see kind of a blanket recommendation. So the same thing for everyone. And we know perimenopause is not the same for any woman. And so having personalized treatment is really important.
And what if someone is a provider and maybe in functional medicine or, a nurse practitioner or just even a nurse, where can they learn more about this?
About restorative medicine
or just
Mira
in general, or if they want to read, if someone comes to them and say, I got this monitor, can you tell me what this data means?
Yes. Well, any provider who wants to understand Mira data, we would suggest that they would get set up with Mira's clinical team, which is very easy. You just go to miracare.com, scroll to the bottom, there's a button that says healthcare professionals. You click on that, you book a meeting. You get set up. What the Mira team does is you enter a 45-minute educational session. So it's not sales, it's education, teaching you when and how to use the Mira data. And then once you've attended that session as a provider, now incorporated into Mira data, you get access to the Mira provider side, the platform where there is an interpretation guide, case studies, webinars, all sorts of resources to make sure these providers are educated well and they feel confident to help their patients.
That's great. I did get to attend this session, and it was very helpful and really wonderful to meet other practitioners who are out, all over the place, wanting to learn more about this type of technology to help women and to make it more accessible to people, because I think people just don't know this exists. And I think a lot of times just struggle in their whatever's going on, and they see their OB once a year, right? And, in a 5-minute visit, and are really need to take, want better care for their feminine life by their journey there through their fertility. Now, you are listed on My Catholic Doctor. So can people reach out to you for coaching or fertility monitoring?
Yes, so I continue to see patients myself as a fertility awareness educator or an NFP instructor. As you mentioned in the beginning, I'm trained in Marquette and symptothermal, so either method I can teach to. The platform, mycatholicdoctor.com, is actually one of the only platforms that has figured out the best way to get insurance to pay for NFP services, which they should, but unfortunately it's not a very straightforward process. And so what My Catholic Doctor has done is they have a partnership set up with an organization that will collect information from new clients who want to learn NFP. They will check the insurance and see what's the path to get this covered for you, because, Blue Cross Blue Shield has one thing and Aetna has another, and then TRICARE has another. And so they will then tell the client, this is your path to getting NFP covered. Unfortunately, not every insurance has been figured out yet, but the list is growing. My Catholic Doctor every month is trying to figure out the next, insurance company. How do we get this covered? Because NFP is actually under the Affordable Care Act. NFP is covered. It's supposed to be covered. No copay, no deductible for all insurances that use CPT codes and ICD-10 codes, but unfortunately that's, as we know, not always how it goes. So again, the My Catholic Doctor team has a process set up for anyone who wants to see if their NFP coverage will be paid for by their insurance. You just contact, go right onto the My Catholic Doctor page, find the section that says NFP, and it will tell you what to do next.
Well, Rose, I have a question. A lot of times over the last 25, 27 years, people, when they find out I'm practicing natural family planning, it's like, oh, that's good for you, but I just don't think I can give up my contraceptive, right? My oral contraceptive especially. And, I'd love for you to share a few minutes to that woman out there that maybe they're, full of anxiety or fear, and they're just clinging to something that is not physically, I'd love to hear it from the professional, because I give my my spiel, and I know that the church has these beautiful teachings that has just brought so much fruit and joy into my life personally, but I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, of course. Well, I can talk about it from so many different angles, but I think just for, again, that listener out there who just thinks, like too much of a risk or something like that, I want to come from that angle first because I have helped couples in very difficult situations who, I'll just give a couple of examples. A couple that she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer when she was 9 months pregnant and started chemo the week the baby was born. I've had women who have had a 24-week baby, gestational age baby born, and their baby's in the NICU, and they have 2 toddlers. Like these very difficult situations. But I have seen so much joy from these couples because they are continuing to commit to the church's teaching. They're in this together. And their marriages are stronger on the other side when they go through this really hard thing. It's not about if something hard is going to happen. It's more about when or what it is. And these couples, I'll never forget the one. I'm going to tear up as I'm trying to tell you. But when I was meeting with this couple who had the breast cancer, she would sometimes be too sick to attend our meetings. And so just the husband would come. And he would open up his little, binder of information, because as you can imagine, it's a pretty high-risk situation, so we were tracking quite a few things, but he would open up his binder, and he knew that data probably better than she did, and, him and I would go through the chart review, and we'd identify what had just happened, and so seeing his dedication and commitment to her, but then when she got better and came back, to our sessions again, I'll never forget, she told me, when you meet with couples, you need to tell them how important it is for the husband to be involved and you to both be in this journey together. And I was like, I already knew that, but coming from you, like how impactful that is. And again, it's not about when not about if something's going to happen. It's more about what it is or when it's going to happen. And when you marry your spouse, you say to them, I'm in this forever, no matter what happens. And so your fertility is not excluded from that. You don't get to decide, unfortunately, if you struggle with infertility or recurrent miscarriages or a cancer diagnosis or the loss of a child. You unfortunately don't get to decide those things. And so I would say from the NFP standpoint is something that's so valuable is your fertility and your hormones that you really should treat them with the value that they have and understand what they're saying to you, why they're saying that, and you can successfully avoid or achieve a pregnancy using NFP. Of course, please get the help of an NFP instructor. No Google teaching yourself NFP.
Well, thank you, Rose. You have been absolutely incredible, and I know this is going to help so many women. Can you tell us one more time where women can find you and the Mirror Monitor?
Yes. So to find the Mirror Monitor as a client, you just go to miracare.com. Very simple. It's MIRA care.com. There's a 20% discount for anyone listening right now. It's the number 2, and then the letter IBF. Inspired by Faith, and then 20. So again, 2IBF20 for a 20% discount to get the monitor and the test strips. And then if you're looking for help from restorative reproductive health medicine providers, so like an actual medical provider or NFP instruction, you can go to mycatholicdoctor.com.
Awesome. Well, you have been listening to Inspired by Faith, the program of the Columbus Catholic Women's Conference. I'm Michelle Fanley in the studio with Emily Jaminet, and today we're talking with Rose MacKenzie about restorative health for women. And let's close in prayer, Emily.
Great.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the gift of my life as a woman, created in your image and likeness. I ask for your strength, grace, and wisdom to guide me in fulfilling my vocation as a woman of faith. Help me to live with courage, kindness, and compassion rooted in your love. Amen.
Amen.
We thank you for joining us for Inspired by Faith. We hope you are blessed and inspired by this episode. To find out more about the Columbus Catholic Women's Conference, visit columbuscatholicwomen.com.
Having a baby with natural family planning, that is great conversation from Inspired by Faith. If you want the full conversation or ones you might have missed, check it out. Podcast Central, EWTN.com/podcast, or subscribe wherever you like to stream. I am Ace McKay. When Catholics Coast to Coast returns, A Reason for Hope is exploring why much of the secular mental health care is falling short and how it's integrating faith and psychology offers a more compelling and complete path to healing. We'll check in with the conversation with A Reason for Hope coming up next on Catholics Coast to Coast.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Hello and welcome back to A Reason for Hope. My name is Mario Costabile and I'm your host today. We are joined with Catholic psychologist Dr. Greg Bottaro. Before becoming a psychologist, he discerned a religious vocation as a Franciscan friar of the Renewal. He lived in the Bronx for 4 years following in the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi. Under the mentorship of Father Benedict Rochelle, this experience formed him in the spirituality of abandonment to divine providence, which he now integrates in his model of psychology. In 2012, Dr. Bottaro returned to New York as a psychologist and founded the Catholic Psych Institute. He currently lives in Connecticut with his wife, Barbara, and 7 children. Dr. Bottaro, how are you?
Thank you so much. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Really great here in New Jersey, and you're in Connecticut. Is that right?
Yep, not too far away.
Awesome. I have a lot of questions for you today. I'm very excited to interview because there's a lot of things that I don't understand about the psychological space, psychology, etc. So my first question, statistics indicate that the mental health crisis today is getting progressively worse. It seems to have been exacerbated by factors like the pandemic and economic uncertainty. What is lacking in secular psychology today? And in your view, why is it not working?
Yeah, it's a huge, huge question. And I think I can give you a really simple answer. Or I use an analogy at least to get to the answer. And it's a little bit shocking when you realize that there's no standard of mental health. And what I mean by that is, I use this analogy. If your car breaks down, you need to take it to a mechanic. You're not going to fix all the problems of your own car. And so you need an expert, somebody you can trust. Well, you want to find a mechanic who knows how to fix your car because they know how a car is built. They have the blueprints, the schematics. And when you know how the thing is supposed to be built, you understand why it's broken. So you bring your car in and the wheel's flat or it doesn't turn anymore. And a good mechanic looks at it and says, okay, this tire's not turning, but I know that a tire is supposed to turn. So we know there's a problem. And then hopefully they go a little deeper than that and they figure out, they know what's wrong. They know how to fix it. Well, the object of the mechanic's care is your car. Now, if you go into the medical sciences, you go into, let's say, cardiology, you have a heart doctor. Heart doctor is an expert on the heart. The object of care is the heart. And the medical science, biology, physiology has come a long way to know what the heart is supposed to do, the blueprint of a heart, the schematics, the drawing of what a heart is. When a heart doesn't work correctly, it doesn't pump fast enough, it doesn't pump blood, it's got a blockage. We look at that and we say, okay, we're going to compare this to the standard of what a healthy heart is supposed to look like. Now we know why this one's not working, and then we can get to work to fix it. It actually is the case, as shocking as it is, that there is no standard of what a human person is in the secular field of mental health and psychology. So you feel like something's broken, you feel like something's off, you don't feel right, your relationship's not going well, you've got turmoil in your family, and you think, okay, well, maybe you have the humility to realize I need some help. I'm going to go find an expert. You look it up on the internet, you get a referral from somebody you trust. It turns out that there are no secular schools of thought that say, here is the whole human person as it's meant to be. There actually is no standard. So this is what's missing. And we can go really deep into this if you want to, but the way we look at it at Catholic Psych Institute is to say, well, we're not going to get a full answer about the human person from the sciences alone, because the sciences measure what's observable. In other words, the material world. And the human person, while part of us exists in the material world, we also have a pretty significant dimension of who we are as persons that is spiritual. It's non-material. You can't see a significant part of who we are. So you can't measure, you can't observe, you can't apply the scientific method to a significant amount of who we are as humans. So this is why the sciences, which are limited to that which is observable, can't possibly ever come up with an accurate model for what a human person really is. That's why we need a Catholic perspective to give us a full model, a real model of what a human person is. And we use the philosophy of the human person and the revealed truth, and or you could say the spirituality, or even the theology of the human person. And we mix that together. We integrate that with the psychological sciences. So the way we talk about it is we understand the person through the lens of faith, reason, and science. And that's how we've been able to come up with a full model, a standard of what is human. We know what the healthy version of us is supposed to look like, and therefore we can make judgments on what unhealth or lack of health is.
That's wonderful and totally makes sense. And it affirms that most of the psychologists that are out there are not incorporating the spiritual component of the human DNA, right? And I love the way you just explained it. So let's talk about your formation and how that developed within you. I mean, the fact that you were in formation with the Franciscan friars and you were mentored by Father Benedict Rochelle, a saint, tell me a little bit about, your history, your background, your formation, and how that formed what you're doing today.
Yeah, I'd love to. When I went to college, my parents had just gotten a divorce. It was kind of a rocky high school time for me. And finally it all kind of broke apart when I went off to college. And I was really reeling. I was sort of figuring out what just happened in my life. Why am I so miserable? Why don't I feel like I know who I am? Some of that's normal for the age, but some of it was deeper because of this family structure. I grew up Italian Catholic. Family was everything, more even so than faith and religion. So when the divorce happened, it rocked my core, and I was wide open to sort of looking for who I am and what this life is all about. I went to Boston College first, and I had this amazing professor, Catholic philosopher, Peter Kreeft, who is actually speaking at our upcoming conference, our Summit of Integration. And he taught me how to think, how to integrate philosophy. He actually introduced me to John Paul II. He mentioned as a patron. He's our patron as well. And the work of John Paul II changed my life. I read a book he wrote called Love and Responsibility. And it was all about marriage and family life and love and relationships and sexuality and romance. And he made sense of why I felt like everything was upside down in my life. He gave an answer to what marriage is supposed to be, what love is meant for, all of these big picture questions. And I realized in that moment of my life that I want to spend the rest of my life helping people understand how important it is to pursue a life of happiness. We must pursue a life of holiness. That if we follow God's plan, it's not just about going to church on Sunday. It's actually about flourishing in our humanity. He knows how he made us, and he loves us. So when he gives us the rules to follow or the things that are important for us to think about in our life, it's because he knows it's good for us. And if we learn those things and follow those things, we actually can be happy. So that was the beginning. I ended up, I studied philosophy there. I ended up transferring to Franciscan University of Steubenville. I continued my philosophy, studied mental health, studied theology, and I actually then went to discern religious life. So like you mentioned, 4 years as a Franciscan in temporary vows, Father Benedict taught me the spiritual life, Franciscan spirituality especially. So I had my philosophy, I had my spirituality, and then I discerned that I was actually called to marriage. So I left the Franciscans before final vows, and I decided, well, now I have to make money. I have to earn a living. So it made sense to become a psychologist. So then I went off to study psychology, and I got my doctorate 5 years later. And my wife started my practice, started our family, and the rest is history.
It's awesome. Great story. Great blend of many aspects of your life to prepare you for what you're doing today. Father Benedict Groeschel informed you in the spirituality of abandonment to divine providence. Share what that is with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, so there's a couple of books out there that people are familiar with. Maybe some spiritual writings by Father Jacques Philippe, and also the book actually called Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Caussade. And it's all about knowing that we are loved by a Father and knowing that we have nothing to actually worry about. Jesus says in Matthew 6:25, do not be anxious about the things of your life. And, I sometimes joke about how, it seems so crazy when Jesus said, eat my flesh. All these disciples left after he said that. Like, that's pretty crazy. Eat my flesh. What are you talking about? I don't think we even take him seriously when he says, don't be anxious about your life. It's almost like that's too crazy. We believe that we can eat flesh, but not being anxious is almost too far afield. But he actually commands us, do not be anxious. How could he possibly expect us to not be anxious about the things, your bills, your taxes are due, you might lose your job, your kids are away from the faith. It's like, you don't like the preaching at church, somebody's cutting you off in the parking lot on the way out. All these things that we're getting upset and anxious all the time. Well, he gives us the reason and he explains it to us. He says, look at the flowers in the field. They don't work and stress about their life, but there's nothing more beautiful than they are. Look at the birds in the air. They're not stressed out and anxious, but they're fed, they're taken care of. We are taken care of. So if we can trust the Father who loves us and takes care of us, that's what divine providence means. He provides for us. Then we actually literally have nothing to be worried about, and we can have no anxiety. And we're seeking peace. We don't want to be ruminating. We don't want to be losing sleep. So this is the key. And what I do in my work is integrate the psychological principles. What does it actually look like in the way your mind works when we're talking about these big, lofty spiritual ideas?
Can you give me an example? How would you incorporate faith into, helping someone psychologically? Do you share these Catholic principles? Do you share the spiritual component, God's will in our life, et cetera, et cetera? Do you share that in tandem with one another? How does that look like?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the client, who we're working with. And some people are well educated, more experienced in the faith. But I think in general, we allow our Catholic formation in faith to inform us about who a person is. Like I said, it's like the car mechanic. Being Catholic means we know who you are, how you're made, how you're supposed to be functioning, and what's wrong if you're not going according to those norms. Some people bring their car to the mechanic and they know a little something about the car. So maybe you will get into a conversation with the mechanic about the kind of oil that you're using or the brand of brake pads that you want to put on. Or some people don't have any idea what any of that's about, but it's okay. It actually has nothing to do with whether or not the car mechanic knows what they're doing. So that's how we look at it. If we know how God made you, you don't even have to be Catholic to come see us and work with us. We work with anybody. It doesn't matter what you believe or your faith, because what we know that we're informed by our faith about actually pertains to every single human person as long as they're human. And that's the model that we're using.
The Brown Scapular is a special Catholic devotional. Invest in a scapular that is as strong as your devotion. At scapulars.com, they use super strong American-made paracord because your scapular should be as strong as your devotion. They also use the finest Australian merino wool that feels like a warm hug from your Heavenly Mother. You'll also find handmade rosaries with our distinctive deliverance cross, Italian-made saint medals, keychains, and jewelry. Visit the link above or below in the description to get yourself one of the most durable, comfortable scapulars in the world.
Ready to walk a path that transforms you, mind, body, and soul? Follow My Camino offers expertly planned Catholic pilgrimages along the sacred Camino de Santiago. Choose from legendary routes like the Camino Frances, the scenic Camino del Norte, the coastal Camino Portugues, or the ancient Camino Primitivo. Whether you have 2 weeks or a full month, we'll guide your journey with prayer, fellowship, and visits to holy sites like Lourdes and Fatima. Start your spiritual adventure at www.followmycamino.com because every journey begins with a single faithful step.
Tell us a little about your mentorship program. I know that is something that the Catholic Site Institute implemented somewhere around the pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right before the pandemic, sort of came up with this idea of how to expand the way that we work with people from a mental health services kind of perspective. And so, I realized that I kind of put a lot of things together around the same time in my life. It was kind of 7 years into my practice. I had that 7-year itch, and I was wondering if this is really what I was made for. I had some frustrations happening in my practice, and I realized I don't feel like I'm doing what I could be doing for people. And I, long story short, realized that in order to really walk with people and help people, I wanted to do what Jesus did for us, which is to really go into people's lives, meet them where they are, not sort of sit back in my office and have a scheduled appointment and you show up when it's convenient for me. But instead, I wanted to actually be a part of somebody's daily life, be available to have dialogue in the midst of the things they're actually going through. And then, we're open to technology and creativity of the human ingenuity. And so using an app and a kind of digital dialogue with voice messages back and forth, we created a methodology in which we can actually carry on a very human, very personal, very deep conversation in dialogue over time, back and forth every day. And so when you're working with one of our mentors, you actually have somebody who is trained in the psychological sciences, but is entering into your world where you are, available to you on a daily basis. So you don't have to compartmentalize and then wait for a session next week. It's like if you had that fight with your wife, if you had your kid come home and complain about the XYZ, if you're losing sleep, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, whatever's going on at work, we're going to talk about it today. You can actually leave a message from where you are, actually talking about how you're feeling in the moment when you're feeling it. And then you're getting responses back and forth. So this is our model. It's called, the fancy technical term for it is integrated, because we bring the faith into it. Daily, because it's every day. Dialogic, meaning it's back and forth dialogue. Mentorship, IDDM. We call it mentorship for short. But that's the model that we developed out of a real deep understanding of how we're made in God's image in this Catholic worldview.
So is it kind of like a hotline, like a mental, if you're having difficulty, you get anybody, or do you get someone that is connected to your history?
Yeah. It's established. It's an established relationship. So you sign up, you get assigned a mentor, and then you get a private channel essentially through this app that we use. And then you have this, it's a private one-way, it's two-way, but you're the only two people in that channel, in that conversation. So it's a dialogue back and forth. All the messages are recorded, which is really interesting because that means that you can always go back to anything that was helpful to you from your mentor in the past. And you're also getting that immediate, within 24-hour response. And that's how the dialogue is actually happening in an integrated daily way.
And you started this 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I personally myself came up with the idea and did it experimentally for a year, starting in 2019. And so that carried me right through into COVID. It was working so well, so quickly, that I knew I had to teach other people how to do this and introduce the rest of my team. And so the rest of Catholic Psych Institute was doing normal traditional psychotherapy, but I shared with them what I was doing with this model, and they all started using it as well, and they loved it. And so eventually we transitioned away from the traditional psychotherapy model into this new mentorship model.
It must be growing. It must be really accelerating, because I think it's a win. I mean, people suffer and they're in the moment. They want to talk to someone. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely, yeah. It's it's always a little tough being innovative and disruptive and sort of breaking out of the old model into something new. So certainly, I'm learning a lot about how to do things like that. It's not how I was trained, but people have the data kind of speaks for itself. The fruit speaks for itself, and so we've got over 1,200 outcome surveys, people talking about how much this has changed their life. We serve over 300 people a month. We have a team of over 30 people now, mentors who have been trained in our model, who are providing this now in their own way. So yeah, we're growing very quickly.
The relationship between sin and psychological health is complex, but Catholic teaching suggests that sin can negatively impact one's psychological well-being. What is your feeling on that when people are struggling and there's the idea of spiritual, attacks, and how do you incorporate the two? How do you decipher between the two? Thoughts on that area?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is our model of integration. What we mean by that is that we don't compartmentalize or separate our emotional health and mental health from our spiritual health. These are convenient lenses to look through, convenient categories to study. If you're going to become an expert in theology, okay, then you go get a degree in moral theology, then you're going to really focus in on sin. But it doesn't mean that the person is somehow separated out into these parts. So whatever we're talking about, it's going to affect all the other parts. Another related question that people ask is like, what's the difference between spiritual direction and therapy? Or what's the difference between demonic influence and a psychological disorder? Well, my answer to all these questions is there's much less different than you might think. And so when we sin, we have this orientation, a gravitation away from what's actually good for us. That's called concupiscence. And when we follow that orientation, it's like if you're made to go north, but your compass is broken and it's pointing you in the wrong direction, and you're only following that compass. In other words, you're only following your orientation towards sin, then you're going to not end up at north. And in the same way, when we follow our disordered desires and our disordered thoughts, we're not going to end up at happiness. We're not going to end up at flourishing. And that really all these things come together: spiritual flourishing, mental flourishing, psychological flourishing. It's human flourishing. And so this is what we need to look at is, okay, how does sin affect me? Well, okay, so you have a proclivity towards, or an orientation to, that taking the easy road, the comfortable way, avoiding discipline, avoiding the hard path. Well, sometimes the right thing, the good thing, and the beautiful thing is the harder path. In fact, kind of usually, most of the time it is actually the harder path. But if we follow our inclinations towards the easier path, we're not going to end up at doing the good, the true, the right, the beautiful thing. And so that's how we want to start to dig a little deeper. Like, how do we know the good, the true, and the beautiful? Well, it's not going to just be from our initial desires. It's maybe going to be towards a modification and maybe a deepening of understanding what we're really looking for. Not the easy way out, but the beautiful thing in the end. So that's how we can talk about some of this overlapping in the same conversation.
Can you define the difference between spiritual direction, as you said, they kind of overlap, versus your work and what you do, psychology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a matter of expertise in terms of the provider. That's really what matters in that question. Ultimately, and this is what we're seeking to develop and provide, is having an expertise that overlaps both.
finding how much faith can transform psychological practices and impact the sin of mental health. Great stuff this week from A Reason for Hope. You want more on this conversation or others, check it out at Podcast Central. Go to EWTN.com/podcast and then subscribe wherever you like to stream so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Ace McKay. Going to enjoy the rest of my Independence weekend. You do the same. Remember to let God define who you are, and I'll see you again with Catholics Coast to Coast.